Good afternoon, everyone. So, as the Secretary mentioned, the Federal Protective Service, or FPS, we were established in 1971 as part of the General Services Administration with the responsibility for protecting federally owned buildings and property. FPS was transferred to the Department of Homeland Security in 2002 as part of the Homeland Security Act. And like the Secretary mentioned, we're responsible for the protection of public buildings and grounds that are owned, occupied, or secured by the federal government. Since May 28th, just to give you some background, we've observed over 425 demonstrations and 260 attacks at federal facilities across the country. These attacks include bullets fired at federal facilities, arson, and objects thrown through windows. Actually, on May 29th, at a federal facility in Oakland, California, during a pretty violent demonstration, 2 of our protective security officers were shot in a drive-by shooting. One of those protective security officers, Pat Underwood, died of his injuries. As you're probably aware, in Portland, the Multnomah County Justice Center has been under attack by violent demonstrators for the last 52 days. They actually paint, that facility is painted every morning. It's been painted about 47 times in the last 52 days. Directly adjacent to the Justice Center, on one side to the north, is the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building. It's one of our federal facilities we protect. And to the north, to the south is the Hatfield United States Courthouse, which has been a primary target of recent attacks. We've noticed during the demonstrations and violence at the Justice Center that some of that violence started creeping over to our 2 federal facilities, and our staff that's normally assigned to Portland was quickly overwhelmed. Due to the number of demonstrations and attacks that we were seeing in Portland, we requested support from CBP and ICE. Within our authority, the Secretary mentioned our law enforcement authority. It's Title 40, Section 1315 of the United States Code. We have the ability to cross-designate DHS officers and agents with that authority when we need their assistance to protect a federal facility. There's a process to do that. There's Attorney General guidelines that were established in 2005 on what is required for someone to have that 1315 authority. So we have to ensure that the training of those officers and agents are meet the requirement of the Attorney General guidelines. And secondly, we have to provide those other DHS officers and agents with specific training on FPS authority and jurisdiction so they know what they're responsible for. I want to highlight what took place over the last 24 hours. This has been a recurring issue in Portland. So typically between the hours of 6 p.m. and 11 p.m., see peaceful, a normal demonstration that you might see, a march, social advocacy, and FPS, we deal with about 900 of those a year. It's a pretty simple process. We coordinate with the group. We provide an area for them to do their demonstration. And then once they're done, we clean up and they go home. 900 a year, 99.9 of those are peaceful. But last night at midnight, violent demonstrators blocked the streets around the Hatfield Courthouse, the Justice Center we mentioned earlier, and the Edith Green Wendell Wyatt Federal Building. So the streets were blocked. At 12:55 a.m., we observed someone taking pictures of the water intake system at the Edith Green Federal Building. Later that night, a Twitter user tweeted, "So we can now shut off the water to the buildings the feds are staying in to make it a nightmare for them." At 1:20, protesters were beginning to bang on the walls of the Hatfield Courthouse. And I think if you've seen images of that, we've got plywood on the front of that. We did paint that plywood with paint that can't catch on fire. So demonstrators were banging on those walls trying to tear the plywood off. A short while later, protesters were kicking the main doors of the courthouse and shining lasers at officers. About 20 minutes later, a fire was reported at what used to be the elk statue in the middle of the city park across the street from the Hatfield Courthouse. This is an area where violent demonstrators typically are meeting at nighttime. A short while later, the group has grown increasingly violent and aggressive. The plywood protecting the Hatfield Courthouse was taken down, and a window was broken while protesters were attempting to breach the courthouse. Several hard objects, including canned food and glass bottles, were thrown at our officers who were out to move them. Protesters advanced towards, engaged the officers again, throwing water bottles and other hard objects, fireworks and using lasers. We had talked about, you've seen the green lasers that are being used out there. We have 3 officers who currently have eye injuries, and they may not recover sight in those eyes from those laser attacks. We have purchased anti-laze glasses, if you will. These are glasses that the officers are wearing now to prevent those eye injuries. At 3:29 this morning, the protesters smashed the glass of the courthouse with a fire extinguisher and attempted to throw commercial-grade fireworks inside the courthouse through the broken glass. Once again, our teams went outside to push them away from the front of the Hatfield Courthouse. The teams faced significant resistance from the crowds. Fireworks and glass bottles were thrown at the officers, and protesters attempted to light a tree on fire directly in front of the Hatfield Courthouse. We did make a total of 7 arrests last night. 2 of those were for 18 U.S.C. 111, which is assault on a federal law enforcement officer. The other 5 were for misdemeanor charges of failure to comply with instructions or vandalism, but at a misdemeanor level. I do want to quickly discuss the uniforms that our officers are wearing out there, and I know Mr. Morgan has brought some examples of what his officers are wearing. This is typical. What I'm wearing is the typical FPS uniform that our officers are wearing in Portland. Because of the nature of the assignment they're working, they are wearing long sleeves. They wear an external vest carrier with their ballistics vest inside. The panels on the back, Police Homeland Security. The panels on the front, Police DHS. It has the name Williams. We are going to convert the name to their badge number because about 38 of our officers that are out there have been doxxed, and their personal information has been put online. And they wear a badge on the front. Next photo, please. So, you know, we've got some CBP officers out there assisting us with our performance of our duties. This is their typical uniform. Mr. Morgan will get into more detail on that later. But it's a standard uniform. It is more tactical, but it's a standard uniform that these teams wear day to day. And next slide, please. And this is the ICE Special Reaction Team officers. Same type of uniform, camouflage, but you can see the police panels in the front and the back, the SRT, and then their badge or their patch on the side there. Mr. Morgan, thank you.